The happens next stuns everyone. Roar cut through the stillness like a storm ripping across an open plain. It wasn't just loud, it was ancient, wild, and full of something deeper than fury. Ethan Blake froze mid-step, his hand tightening around the rusted metal railing that bordered the enclosure. His breath caught in his chest, eyes fixed on the colossal figure pacing beyond the heavy mesh fence. 12 years. 12 long, aching years since he had last seen Kumba. And now, the lion he had once cradled in his arms as a frail cub stood fully grown, muscles rippling under his golden coat, eyes burning like coals in the African sun. Around him, the staff shuffled nervously, their voices low and cautious. "Stay back," one warned. "He's unpredictable. He doesn't recognize people anymore." Ethan barely heard them. His pulse pounded in his ears, drowning out every sound but the heavy thud of Kumba's paws against the dry earth. There was no fear in Ethan's heart, only a fragile, flickering hope that refused to be extinguished. His lips parted, and almost without thinking he spoke the name he hadn't dared utter aloud in over a decade. Kumba. The word felt raw on his tongue, a quiet plea thrown across a chasm of years. Kumba's ears twitched, his restless pacing slowed, and for one suspended moment he stood motionless. The lion's gaze shifted, locking onto Ethan with an intensity that made the air itself feel thin. The staff fell silent. Even the ever-present calls of distant birds seemed to hush, as though the entire sanctuary had paused to witness this fragile thread of connection stretch between man and beast. Ethan's throat tightened. He could see it, a flicker of something buried deep within Kumba's amber eyes. A memory struggling to surface, battling through layers of time and instinct. His voice trembled but did not falter. "It's me, old friend." Kumba took a slow, deliberate step forward. The ground seemed to tremble beneath his weight, or maybe it was just Ethan's heart thrumming in his chest. Every instinct in the staff screamed to pull him away, to retreat, but Ethan stood rooted, unwilling to look away. Then, against all odds, Kumba stopped just inches from the fence, lowered his mighty head, and let out a sound that wasn't a growl. It was softer, almost questioning. Ethan's breath caught as he realized. Kumba hadn't forgotten. Ethan's eyes blurred with tears as he stood frozen, staring into the gaze of the lion that once fit in his arms like a fragile heartbeat. The moment held them both captive, time folding in on itself, and suddenly Ethan wasn't a man with gray at his temples. He was back to being the young caretaker who had first found Kumba trembling under the shadow of a fallen acacia, orphaned and too weak to cry. He could almost feel the weight of the cub against his chest, small ribs rising and falling against his palm, the warmth of fragile life flickering between his fingers. He had found Kumba on a day the sky had bled orange at dawn, when poachers had left behind not just a broken body, but a tiny soul abandoned to fate. Ethan remembered the way his heart had twisted at the sight, how instinct overruled protocol. He wasn't supposed to interfere, they told him not to get attached. But how could he not? When he looked into Kumba's eyes back then, he saw something achingly familiar, the same quiet plea he had once seen in his daughter's eyes during her final days in the hospital. He never spoke of it to anyone, but caring for Kumba had felt like holding on to something he had already lost. Night after night, he nursed the cub back to life. When the other caretakers went home, Ethan stayed. He warmed milk in shaky hands, whispered to Kumba in the soft tones of a father telling bedtime stories, not knowing if the cub could understand, but hoping his heart would carry the meaning. Slowly, strength had returned to Kumba's frail limbs, his playful swipes, his clumsy pounces. Every small victory etched itself into Ethan's soul like a quiet redemption. But fate was cruel. When new management took over the sanctuary, strict rules separated caretakers from the grown predators. They said it was safer, more professional. Ethan fought it until his voice grew hoarse, but the decision was final. Forced to leave, he had walked away from Kumba with a weight so heavy it nearly broke him. He had tried to bury the memories, but they clung to him like shadows, whispering through sleepless nights. Now, standing face to face once more, Ethan saw that same flicker in Kumba's eyes. Not wild instinct, but recognition. Not just of a face, but of every act of quiet, desperate kindness that had once bound them together. The years had stretched like an endless road between them, but neither time nor distance had truly severed the thread. As Ethan stood frozen by the enclosure, memories pressed hard against his chest, and he wondered if Kumba had felt the same hollow ache all these years. In his small, quiet home, far from the sanctuary, Ethan had never stopped feeling it. Nights were the worst. He would sit by the flickering light of an old lamp, staring at worn photographs of Kumba as a cub, tracing the edges with his fingers as if that could somehow bridge the gap of time. Each photo felt like a lifeline slipping further away. In some, Kumba's tiny paws barely filled Ethan's palm. In others, the cub's amber eyes shone with playful curiosity, wide open to a world that had almost destroyed him. Ethan used to speak to those photos in the quiet hours, his voice rough with longing. "I hope they're treating you well," he would murmur. But deep down, he feared otherwise. Kumba had not thrived after Ethan's departure. Ethan knew this from hushed reports and articles that crossed his path. The once spirited lion had grown distant, his playfulness replaced with wary aggression. He had lashed out at the staff, turned away from the enrichment toys meant to occupy his restless mind. They labeled him unpredictable, dangerous. But Ethan saw through the words. He saw a heart mourning something it couldn't name, a silent hunger for the bond they had shared. He felt it too. Every day apart had carved a deeper hollow inside him, a space that no one else could fill. Friends urged him to move on, to let go of what they called a dangerous attachment. But they hadn't seen Kumba's first brave steps. They hadn't heard the soft rumble of contentment in the cub's chest as he nestled against Ethan's heartbeat, trusting him with a life too fragile to survive alone. When the news of Kumba's growing unrest reached him again, something inside Ethan snapped awake. He could no longer watch from a distance, haunted by the thought that Kumba might live out his days believing he had been abandoned. He packed his old caretaker's jacket, the one still faintly marked with the lion's cub-era paw prints, and made the journey back. Now, standing at the fence, Ethan saw the truth in Kumba's eyes. The emptiness of their separation had not been his alone. Ethan's fingers trembled against the cool metal of the fence, the chill sinking deep into his skin, but he didn't pull away. His eyes never left Kumba's, afraid that even a blink might break the fragile thread tying them together. Behind him, the staff's voices rose in cautious warning, but they sounded far away, like echoes in a dream he couldn't wake from. All that mattered was the lion before him, the soul he had once saved and who somehow might still remember the man who had carried him through the shadows of death. "Kumba," Ethan whispered again, softer this time, his throat tight, his heart straining against his ribs. The name tasted like home, like hope, like everything he had lost and dared not wish to find again. The lion's ears flicked at the sound, and his massive body tensed, not with hostility but with something more searching, as if the name had reached a buried place inside him, long sealed away by time and loneliness. Ethan could feel the weight of the staff's fear thick in the air. He heard the sharp click of tranquilizer guns being readied, the shuffle of boots on gravel as they prepared for the worst. Still, he stood his ground. Fear had no place here, not between them. He thought back to the countless nights he had sat by Kumba's side, keeping the fever at bay. Whispering lullabies meant more for himself than the cub, songs of safety, of survival, of trust. "I'm here," Ethan said, voice rough but steady. "I never forgot you." The words hung between them like a fragile bridge. Kumba took another step closer, the heavy muscles in his shoulders rippling under his tawny coat. His nostrils flared, pulling in the scent of a man who had once been his whole world. His gaze softened, just barely, but enough to steal the breath from Ethan's lungs. Every instinct told Ethan to be still, but his heart ached too deeply to obey. Slowly, he raised his hand and pressed it flat against the fence, mirroring the gesture he had done so many years before when calming the frightened cub. To his astonishment, Kumba lowered his great head and pressed his scarred forehead against the other side, right against Ethan's trembling palm. In that quiet, impossible moment, all the lost years seemed to fall away, leaving only the bond that had never truly broken. A quiver ran through Ethan's fingers as he felt the weight of Kumba's head, even through the cold barrier of steel. It wasn't his imagination. The pressure was real, the warmth seeping through to his skin, as if the lion himself had reached across the years to say, "I remember." Ethan swallowed hard, his eyes stinging. He wanted to speak, but his throat tightened under the flood of emotions rising inside him. The words felt too small for the moment, too fragile to carry the weight of all he wished to say. Kumba lingered against the fence, eyes half closed, nostrils drawing in the familiar scent. The lion's breath fogged the metal between them, and for a heartbeat it felt like there was no fence at all, no separation, only the quiet recognition of two souls who had once trusted each other completely. Ethan's heart pounded so loudly he could barely hear the murmurs of disbelief from the staff behind him. He didn't care. None of it mattered. All that existed was this fragile miracle unfolding right before him. A small, uncertain sound rumbled from Kumba's chest. Not a growl, not a roar, but something closer to a purr buried beneath layers of wild instinct. It was a sound Ethan had not heard since Kumba's cub days, when he would nestle against Ethan's chest after a bottle, warm and safe in the arms of a man who had become his only family. Hearing it now, from this massive, fearsome creature, nearly buckled Ethan's knees. "Kumba," Ethan breathed, his voice cracking under the weight of memory. "It's me. I'm here." Kumba's eyes opened fully, and in them Ethan saw a flicker of light. Not the wild glint of a predator, but the spark of something deeper. Recognition, trust. A bond that had never been severed, only buried beneath time and solitude. Slowly, deliberately, Kumba's great paw lifted and pressed against the fence, mirroring Ethan's hand. The sight stole the breath from everyone watching, silencing even the most skeptical hearts in that moment. Tears blurred Ethan's vision as he pressed his forehead against the cool metal, resting it against Kumba's paw. "You remember," he whispered, barely able to believe it himself. And in Kumba's steady, unblinking gaze, Ethan saw the answer so clear it needed no words at all. The silence around them felt like the whole world had paused, holding its breath for what might come next. Ethan didn't move, afraid that even the smallest shift could shatter this impossible moment. Kumba's paw stayed pressed to the fence, as if he, too, feared the fragile connection might slip away. Behind Ethan, the staff exchanged uncertain glances, their fear flickering beneath their awe. No one spoke, no one dared. Even the tranquilizer guns, once so ready, lowered slightly, their operators caught in the spell. Then a voice, quiet but firm, broke the stillness. "Let them open the gate." Ethan's breath hitched. He turned toward the sanctuary director, an older woman with cautious eyes. She studied the scene not as someone seeing a threat, but as someone witnessing a miracle too profound to interrupt. Around her, debate rose in hushed urgency, but she held up her hand. "Slowly," she ordered. "If we hesitate too long, we'll never know." Ethan's heart thundered in his chest as the inner gate creaked open, metal groaning under its own weight. The staff stood at the ready, tension wound tight in their bodies, yet no one made a move to stop it. Ethan forced himself to breathe, eyes never leaving Kumba's. The lion's ears twitched at the sound, his muscles coiling, but not in fear, not in aggression. It was a readiness, as though he had been waiting for this moment just as much. The gate swung wider, revealing the bare earth between them, a space so small yet filled with a lifetime of separation. Ethan stepped forward, slow, steady, feeling the tremor in his legs but refusing to let it guide him. Kumba's eyes followed every movement, his breathing deep and even. One step, then another. Ethan moved until there was no barrier left between them, only open air heavy with the weight of memory. Kumba's chest rose, a deep breath drawn in through flared nostrils. He lowered his head, eyes locked on Ethan's, and for a heartbeat the world seemed to vanish entirely. Ethan stood still, not as a man facing danger, but as a man facing a friend lost and found. No fear, no defense, just faith. Kumba closed the space between them with slow, powerful steps. Then, with the gentleness of a memory returning to life, he nuzzled against Ethan's chest. The tears Ethan had held back finally fell, and he let them, because this was the answer he had longed for all these years. Ethan felt the weight of Kumba's head against his chest, solid and warm, as if the lion had carried every year of separation with him and laid them all down in that single, unspoken gesture. His breath caught in his throat, tears slipping freely down his cheeks now, unhidden and unashamed. He raised a trembling hand and ran it through Kumba's thick mane, the familiar texture bringing a flood of memories crashing over him. The cub he had once cradled had grown into a king, yet, in this moment, he was still the same soul, still the creature that had trusted Ethan's hands to keep him alive. Around them, the staff stood frozen, disbelief carved into their faces. Some had eyes wide with fear still, others with wonder, but not one dared interrupt the reunion. The air felt sacred, like they were witnesses to something so rare it didn't belong to the world of ordinary things. Even the birds in the trees seemed to hold their voices, as if nature itself understood the gravity of what was unfolding. Ethan's voice broke the quiet, rough but full of warmth. "I missed you every single day." His fingers gently scratched behind Kumba's ear, the way he used to when calming the restless cub in the dead of night. Kumba's eyes softened, closing halfway as a deep rumbling sound vibrated from his chest. It wasn't a growl, it wasn't warning, it was contentment. Trust made audible, a sound that felt like home returning after being lost in the wilderness. In that moment, Ethan understood something that tightened his chest with both pain and peace. Kumba had not just survived these years. He had carried Ethan's absence like a scar, just as Ethan had carried Kumba's. Their bond had not faded. It had endured, hidden beneath instinct and time, waiting for this day. And now, against every rule of nature, against every expectation, they had found their way back. The sanctuary director wiped at her eyes, her voice thick when she finally spoke. "We thought he'd forgotten," she said quietly, almost to herself. "But kindness, it stays, doesn't it?" Ethan couldn't answer. His throat swelled too full with emotion. Instead, he pressed his forehead to Kumba's once more, feeling the lion's breath warm against his skin, and he let his heart speak in the only way it could, through the silent, unbreakable language of love that had never left them. Ethan stood in the sunlit enclosure, Kumba still leaning into him, as if reluctant to let go of the moment they had both waited so long to reclaim. The lion's breath warmed the air between them, steady and calm, like the quiet rhythm of a heart that had found its way home. Ethan's hand never left Kumba's mane, his fingers moving slowly, memorizing every strand as if to make up for the years lost in silence. For a long time, neither of them moved. They didn't need to. Everything that mattered was already happening in the space between them. A reunion too deep for words. The staff, once tight with fear, softened around them. Cameras were lowered, walkie-talkies forgotten. Even hardened caretakers, used to the sharp edges of survival, now blinked back tears. They saw not just a man and a lion, but a bond that had defied time itself. In Kumba's eyes, they no longer saw a wild beast, but a soul touched by kindness, one that had never let go of the hand that first saved him. Weeks passed, and Ethan never left the sanctuary again. He returned every morning before dawn, walking to Kumba's enclosure not as a visitor, but as family. They spent hours together, under the rising sun and beneath quiet stars, rebuilding the trust that had never truly died. Kumba, once restless and withdrawn, grew calm. He played with enrichment toys again, roared less out of frustration and more to greet the day. And perhaps most touching of all, he took gentle care of a new orphaned cub brought to the sanctuary, nudging it softly, the way Ethan had once done for him. Ethan watched this with a full heart, knowing the kindness he had sown had bloomed beyond anything he could have imagined. His quiet whispers to Kumba, his sleepless nights, his unwavering belief, they had not been in vain. They had left a mark, not just on a lion's heart, but on the world itself. Kindness, Ethan knew now more than ever, does not fade. It does not vanish with time or get buried beneath life's harsh winds. It stays, it lingers in the quiet spaces, waiting for the moment it is needed most. If this story touched your heart, remember that kindness, no matter how small, leaves ripples that stretch far beyond what we can see. Subscribe to join us for more true and deeply moving stories like this. Stories that remind us of the quiet power of compassion, the beauty of enduring bonds, and the hope that even after years apart, love finds its way back home. Let's keep these moments alive together.